The Vanishing at Lake Michigan, a disappearance without a trace. The Old Timers in Havenwood, a small, wind-battered town clinging to the western shore of Lake Michigan, had a saying, "The lake gives, and the lake takes." It was a phrase uttered with a sigh at funerals of fishermen lost to sudden squalls. A somber toast in dim taverns when the gales of November came screaming off the water. But the lake was a constant, a vast, indifferent god of freshwater and fury. It had moods. It had secrets, but it always left something behind, a piece of wreckage, a tattered life vest, a body bloated and bleached by the depths. Until the night of October 12, 2023, the night the lake took Liam Hannon and left nothing at all. That night, a harvest moon, swollen and orange, hung in a sky of polished obsidian. It cast a shimmering, silver-gilt path across the water, a celestial road leading from the sandy shore to an infinite, black horizon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the nearby state park and the fainter, earthy perfume of decaying leaves. It was a beautiful night, a deceptive one, the kind of night that lulled you into a false sense of peace, masking the cold, hungry darkness that lay just beneath the surface of things. The first sign that something was amiss was not a shout, not a splash, not the guttural roar of an engine dying. It was silence. A profound and unnatural silence where there should have been the rhythmic crunch of tires on a gravel turnout. At 3:17 a.m., Deputy Sheriff Miles Corbin, a man whose weary eyes had seen more than his 35 years should have allowed, was on the last leg of his patrol. He was thinking of coffee, of the warmth of his bed, of the soft breathing of his wife beside him. The scenic overlook on Ridge Road was usually his final stop, a place to park his cruiser, kill the engine, and watch the moonlit water for a few minutes. A small, ritualistic moment of peace before heading home. But tonight, the overlook was already occupied. A dark blue sedan, a late model Honda Accord, was parked at the far end, angled slightly towards the lake. Its presence wasn't unusual. Lovers, insomniacs, and soul searchers were often drawn to this spot. What was unusual was the complete lack of life. The car was a void, a shape cut out of the moonlight. No glowing phone screens, no silhouettes, no steamed-up windows. Corbin pulled his cruiser in behind it, the crunch of his own tires sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. He bathed the Honda in his headlights, then switched to the floodlight mounted on his A-pillar, its harsh white beam sweeping across the vehicle and the surrounding area. The car was pristine, no signs of forced entry, no struggle, just empty. He got out, his boots scuffing on the loose gravel. The wind picked up, a low moan that rustled through the tall dune grasses. He approached the driver's side first. The door was locked. He cupped his hands around his eyes and peered inside. The interior was neat. A half-empty bottle of water sat in the center console. A paperback novel, its cover dog-eared, rested on the passenger seat. On the driver's seat, placed with an almost deliberate neatness, were a leather wallet and a smartphone, its screen dark and impassive. A cold knot tightened in Corbin's stomach. People didn't just walk away from their wallets and phones. Not in this day and age. That was your lifeline, your identity, your connection to everything. Leaving him behind was like cutting a string to a balloon. You were intentionally letting yourself drift away. He walked around the car, his flashlight beam dancing over the ground. The overlook was a simple affair, a gravel patch, a low wooden guardrail, and then a steep, sandy drop-off to the beach below. The path to the beach was a set of crude wooden steps about 50 yards away. Corbin's light found them, and something else. Footprints, a single set, leading from the driver's side door of the Honda. They were clear in the damp sand and gravel at the edge of the turnout. Men's shoes, maybe a size 10 or 11, with a distinctive tread pattern. They moved with a steady, unhurried pace directly towards the edge of the bluff. Not towards the stairs. They went right up to the wooden guardrail. And there, they stopped. Corbin played his light over the area. There were no other tracks. No signs of a struggle. No scuff marks on the top of the rail, which was slick with dew. The footprints simply walked to the edge of the world and ceased to exist. Below, the beach was a ribbon of pale sand. The waves, small and gentle tonight, lapped at the shore with a soft, rhythmic hiss, like a sleeping beast. The moonlight revealed nothing but an unbroken expanse of sand and the dark, hungry water beyond. He stood there for a long time, the wind whipping his jacket around him. The only sounds the sigh of the lake and the crackle of his own radio. He called it in. his voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the deep, primal unease that was creeping into his bones. A missing person, an abandoned vehicle, but his gut, a finely tuned instrument honed by years of dealing with the dark underbelly of this quiet town, told him it was more than that. This wasn't just a man who had walked away. This was a man who had been erased. The car, the wallet, the phone, they were the last remnants. The final, silent testament. The footprints were the last sentence of a story that ended mid-word. And the lake was the period at the end of that sentence. A vast, black, unreadable period. The man who had vanished was named Liam Hannon. He was 32 years old. By all accounts, he was the kind of man who didn't vanish. He was solid, dependable, rooted, a man of routines and responsibilities. He was an architect, a partner at a small but successful firm in Grand Rapids. An hour's drive south, he and his wife, Clara, had moved to Havenwood 2 years prior, buying a charming, renovated farmhouse set on 5 acres of land, a place where they could escape the city and, they hoped, start a family. Liam was handsome in a quiet, unassuming way. He had kind eyes, the color of moss after a rain, and a smile that crinkled their corners. He was tall and lanky, with the slightly stooped shoulders of someone who spent his days hunched over drafting tables and computer screens. He was well liked in the community, known for his thoughtful designs that respected the local landscape and his willingness to volunteer for town cleanup days. He was, in the words of his next-door neighbor, as steady as the lighthouse. Clara Hannon was a different sort of creature. Where Liam was earth, she was fire, a freelance graphic designer with a mane of fiery red hair and a laugh that could fill a room. She was vibrant and passionate. They were, to all outside observers, a perfect couple, the steady man and the brilliant woman, their differences complementing each other, creating a whole that was stronger and brighter than its parts. They were the couple you saw at the farmer's market on Saturdays, holding hands, laughing as they picked out organic vegetables. The couple whose Christmas lights were always the most tasteful, whose garden was always the most envied. But behind the idyllic facade, cracks had begun to form. Detective Isabella Rossi, called in from the county seat to lead the investigation, learned this on her first visit to the Hannon farmhouse. Rossi was a sharp, intuitive investigator in her early 40s, with a reputation for seeing the things others missed. She had a calm demeanor that put people at ease. But her eyes, dark and intelligent, missed nothing. The farmhouse was beautiful, a picture-perfect image of rustic charm. But inside, Rossi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The house was too neat, too tidy. It felt staged, like a showroom. Clara Hannon, her face pale and her green eyes wide with a terror that seemed almost performative, sat on a plush cream-colored sofa, wringing her hands. He was just going for a drive, she said, her voice a reedy whisper. He does that sometimes. When he can't sleep, he likes to watch the water. It calms him, he says. According to Clara, Liam had been restless lately, stressed about a big project at work, a new community center that was facing budget cuts and political opposition. He'd been distant, quiet. That night, they had a small argument over dinner. Something trivial, she claimed, about finances. He'd gone to his study to work. She'd gone to bed. She woke up around 2 a.m. and he wasn't there. She assumed he'd gone for one of his drives. When she woke again at 6 a.m. and his side of the bed was still empty, cold, she had started to worry. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Then the police had shown up at her door. Rossi listened, her gaze sweeping the room. On the mantelpiece was a collection of framed photos. The happy couple on their wedding day, on vacation in Italy, smiling with friends. But the most recent photo showed just Liam, standing on a pier, the lake behind him. He wasn't smiling. His eyes held a deep, hollowed-out sadness. Over the next few days, Rossi and her team began to peel back the layers of Liam Hannon's seemingly perfect life. The big project at work was indeed a source of stress. But not just because of budget cuts. His partner at the firm, a slick, ambitious man named Marcus Thorne, revealed that Liam had been fiercely opposed to using a certain contractor for the project. A company with rumored ties to organized crime and a history of shoddy workmanship. Marcus had overruled him, pushing the deal through. Liam was a purist, Marcus said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. A great designer, but naive about how the world works. He was taking it too personally. Then there was the family. Liam's younger brother, Ethan, was a troubled soul, a musician with more talent than luck. He had a history of addiction and petty crime. Liam had been supporting him financially for years. A source of constant friction between him and Clara, Rossi learned that just 2 weeks before his disappearance, Liam had cut Ethan off, telling him it was time he stood on his own 2 feet. Ethan, when interviewed, was a wreck, alternating between tearful remorse and bitter anger. He was my rock, he sobbed, and I was his anchor, dragging him down. Clara hated me. She always thought I was bleeding him dry. The deeper Rossi dug, the more the idyllic image of the Hannons' marriage began to fray. Friends, when pressed, admitted that the couple had been arguing more frequently. Clara was growing frustrated with Liam's quiet melancholy, with his preoccupation with work and his brother. She wanted to travel, to live a bigger life. He seemed to be retreating further into himself. And then, a bombshell. A close friend of Clara's reluctantly admitted that Clara had been having an affair. It was with an old college friend, a man who lived in Chicago. She claimed it was over, that it had been a mistake. But the timeline was damning. It had been ongoing for 6 months, right up until the week Liam vanished. When Rossi confronted Clara with this, her composure finally shattered. She confessed, insisting that Liam didn't know, that it had nothing to do with his disappearance. But Rossi could see the lie in her eyes, the flicker of fear that he might have known after all. The night of the disappearance became the focal point of the investigation. Every detail was scrutinized, every second accounted for. The abandoned car was a steel and glass enigma. The doors were locked, the windows rolled up, the wallet contained over $300 in cash and all of his credit cards. The phone, when the tech team finally managed to access it, offered a frustratingly blank slate. The last call was to his office 2 days prior. The last text was to Clara that afternoon. A simple, "See you at home." The browser history showed searches for architectural designs, news articles, and the weather forecast. There was nothing to suggest a man planning to disappear or end his life. No goodbyes, no searches for suicide methods, no suspicious contacts. The footprints remained the most baffling clue. They were so clear, so deliberate. They walked from the car to the rail. And then, nothing. The team scoured the bluff and the beach below. They used ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and divers. The dogs whimpered and grew agitated at the spot where the footprints ended, but found no scent trail leading away. The divers, battling the cold, murky water, found nothing but rocks, silt, and a few rusted beer cans. The bluff itself was a sheer drop of about 30 feet, a mixture of sand and tough, scrubby vegetation. It was possible to climb down, but it would have been difficult, and would have certainly left traces, broken branches, disturbed sand, other footprints. There were none. It was as if a giant, invisible hand had simply plucked Liam Hannon from the earth. The search for Liam Hannon became the biggest news story in the region. News vans camped out near the overlook, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metallic flowers. The town of Havenwood, once a sleepy haven, was now a place of whispers and suspicion. 4 main theories began to circulate, each with its own set of believers. The first, and the one the sheriff's department initially favored, was the theory of a tragic accident or suicide. Liam, despondent over work and his personal life, had gone to the overlook to clear his head. He had stood at the rail, lost in thought, and had either slipped and fallen, or had willingly jumped into the dark water below. The lake in October was lethally cold. Hypothermia would have set in within minutes. His body, they argued, could have been pulled under by a strong current and might not surface for weeks, or even months. If ever, it was a neat, tragic, and logical explanation, but it didn't account for the locked car, or the wallet and phone left behind with such care, and it didn't explain the utter lack of any other physical evidence. The second theory was that of a voluntary disappearance. Liam had simply had enough. The pressure at work, his troubled brother, his crumbling marriage, it had all become too much. He had staged the scene at the overlook to look like a suicide. And then, under the cover of darkness, had walked away to start a new life. He could have had a Confederate waiting for him on the road, or a pre-stashed vehicle. This theory gained traction when investigators discovered a series of large cash withdrawals from his personal bank account in the month leading up to his disappearance, nearly $20,000. Unaccounted for. Clara claimed to know nothing about it. Was this his escape fund? But this theory, too, had its holes. Liam was a man with deep roots. It was hard to imagine him abandoning everything and everyone, especially his troubled brother who, for all his faults, Liam clearly loved, and to disappear so completely, without a single trace, required a level of planning and deception that seemed utterly alien to his character. The third, and most sinister, theory was that of foul play. He had been abducted, or murdered and his body disposed of. This theory branched into several possibilities. Had his conflict with the crooked contractor at work escalated? Had they silenced him to ensure the project went through? Marcus Thorne, his business partner, had a clear financial motive for wanting Liam out of the way. Or was it closer to home? A crime of passion, Clara and her lover. Had Liam discovered the affair and confronted them? Had a heated argument turned deadly? Or perhaps it was Ethan, the desperate, drug-addled brother, enraged at being cut off financially. Any of these scenarios was plausible, but they all ran into the same problem as the other theories, the scene itself. The locked car, the lack of a struggle, the footprints that led to nowhere. How could an abduction or murder have taken place so cleanly, so silently, leaving behind such a pristine yet baffling tableau? The fourth theory was the one whispered in hushed tones in the corners of bars and over backyard fences. It was the one that belonged to the town, to the folklore of the lake. Havenwood, like many old towns on the Great Lakes, had its share of ghost stories and local legends. There were tales of water wraiths, malevolent spirits that dragged the unwary into the depths. There were stories of strange lights seen hovering over the water on moonless nights, of eerie, disembodied voices carried on the wind. Some of the older residents spoke of the lake's shadow, a supposed creature of the deep, a legend passed down from the Potawatomi tribes who had first lived on this shore. They said it was a shape-shifting entity, a guardian of the lake that would sometimes rise to claim a soul. It was nonsense, of course, superstitious ramblings, but as the days turned into weeks with no news, no body, and no answers, more and more people started to wonder. The rational explanations all seemed to have fatal flaws. Maybe, just maybe, the truth was something that couldn't be explained by logic or police procedure. Maybe the lake really did just take him. Detective Rossi didn't believe in water wraiths or lake shadows. She believed in evidence, in motive, and in the dark, tangled complexities of human nature. The case had stalled. The media attention was fading, replaced by the next sensational story. The official search had been scaled back. Liam Hannon was on his way to becoming another statistic, another cold case file gathering dust in a cabinet. But Rossi couldn't let it go. The neatness of it all, the impossible tidiness of the scene. It felt like a taunt. It was a perfectly constructed puzzle, and she was missing the key piece. The first turning point came from the most unlikely of sources. A local birdwatcher, a retired librarian named Agnes Peterson, came forward. She was a creature of habit, rising before dawn every day to walk the trails of the state park that bordered the overlook. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time, but the morning after Liam disappeared, around 5:30 a.m., she had seen something unusual. A small, rusty fishing boat with a faded green hull, adrift about a quarter-mile from shore, directly out from the overlook. There was no one in it. What struck her as odd was that the boat was not anchored, and it was drifting against the prevailing current. It was as if, she told Rossi, her brow furrowed in concentration, it was being held in place by something I couldn't see. By the time the sun was fully up, it was gone. She dismissed it as a fisherman's boat that had slipped its mooring. But after reading about the case, she wondered if it was connected. It was a slim lead, but it was something. Rossi's team began a painstaking search of every boat registration, every marina, every private dock within a 50-mile radius. It was a needle in a haystack. The second breakthrough came from the digital world. A young, tech-savvy detective on Rossi's team decided to take one more deep dive into Liam's digital life. He wasn't just looking at his phone and laptop, he was looking at the cloud. He found that Liam had a secondary, private cloud storage account, one that wasn't linked to his primary email. It took them 2 weeks and a court order to get access. And what they found inside blew the case wide open. The account contained a single, encrypted folder. Inside was a collection of documents, photos, and audio recordings. It was Liam's private investigation file. For the past 4 months, Liam Hannon, the quiet architect, had been living a secret life. He had suspected his wife was having an affair. The audio files were secretly recorded conversations between him and Clara. tense, whispered arguments in which he confronted her with his suspicions and she vehemently denied them. The photos were grainy, long lens shots of Clara meeting her lover in Chicago. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The bulk of the files related to his business partner, Marcus Thorne, and the crooked contracting firm. Liam had been methodically and secretly gathering evidence of bribery, kickbacks, and safety violations. He had documentation of Marcus meeting with known mob figures. He had blueprints that showed the contractors were using substandard materials for the new community center, cutting corners in a way that would eventually make the building dangerously unstable. He had a recorded phone call in which Marcus and the contractor discussed taking care of a building inspector who was asking too many questions. Liam Hannon wasn't just a purist, he was a whistleblower, and he was about to go to the FBI. The last entry in a dated log was from October 11th, the day before he vanished. It read, "Final proof. Meeting with FBI next week. Marcus doesn't know, I hope." Suddenly, the list of suspects with a powerful motive to want Liam dead had solidified. Marcus Thorne stood to lose his business, his reputation, and his freedom. Clara Hannon stood to lose her comfortable life and face the humiliation of her affair being exposed in what would have been a messy divorce. Her lover, a married man with a powerful family, also had a reason to want the situation contained. And the contractors, with their mob ties, were certainly not strangers to making people disappear. The rusty green fishing boat Agnes Peterson had seen took on a new, sinister significance. Rossi's team redoubled their efforts. And finally, they got a hit. A boat matching the description had been reported stolen from a private dock 20 miles up the coast 2 days before Liam's disappearance. It was found abandoned a week later, 50 miles down the coast. Wiped clean, the pieces were starting to click into place. Rossi's new theory was cold, hard, and brutal. Liam hadn't gone to the Overlook to clear his head. He had been lured there. Or, he had gone there to meet someone. Someone he thought he could trust. The scene at the Overlook wasn't a suicide or a disappearance, it was a meticulously staged misdirection. The locked car, the wallet and phone left behind, it was all designed to make the police look in the wrong direction. To make them think it was a personal crisis. A man who had simply walked away from his life. But who was the architect of this deception? The focus of the investigation narrowed intensely on Marcus Thorne and Clara Hannon. Their alibis for the night of the disappearance were weak. Marcus claimed he was home alone, working. Clara claimed she was asleep. They both denied any knowledge of Liam's investigation. But when presented with the evidence from the cloud account, their composure began to crack. Marcus blustered and threatened lawyers. Clara dissolved into a puddle of tears and denials. The most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, Liam's own obsession with detail. In his secret files, he had a subfolder labeled GPS. It contained location data he had been secretly tracking from a small GPS device. The data was from Clara's car. He had planted it there weeks ago, confirming her trips to Chicago. But he had forgotten about it. The police, however, did not. They pulled the data for the device. On the night Liam disappeared, between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., Clara's car had not been parked at their farmhouse. It had traveled to a secluded, wooded area 10 miles inland. And it had met another vehicle there. A vehicle registered to Marcus Thorne. The alibis were shattered. The secret meeting was exposed. Rossi brought them both in for interrogation, placing them in separate rooms. She started with Clara, laying out the evidence, the affair, the secret files, the GPS data. She watched as Clara's denials crumbled, replaced by a desperate, panicked fear. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Clara finally whispered, her voice cracking, "Marcus called me. He said Liam knew everything. About us. About the business deal. He said Liam was going to ruin us both. He said he just wanted to talk to him. To scare him. To convince him to drop it." The story tumbled out. A sordid tale of greed, betrayal, and fear. Marcus had discovered Liam's secret investigation. He had panicked. He used his knowledge of Clara's affair as leverage, convincing her that they were in this together. That Liam's actions would destroy them both. They conspired to lure Liam to the Overlook. Clara was the bait. She called him, crying, telling him she was in trouble, that her car had broken down. It was a lie. When Liam arrived at the Overlook, Marcus and 2 men from the contracting firm were waiting. This is where Clara's story became hazy. Frantic. "I wasn't there. I stayed in the car. Down the road. Marcus told me to wait. I heard them arguing, shouting. Then, it went quiet. A horrible, long quiet. Marcus came back to the car. He was pale. He had a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He just said, "It's done. He's gone. Go home, and you don't know anything." Rossi moved to the other interrogation room. She faced Marcus Thorne, his expensive suit now rumpled, his confident smirk replaced by a sheen of cold sweat. She didn't tell him what Clara had said. She simply laid out a series of photographs on the table between them. Photos from Liam's secret file. Photos of Marcus with the mobsters. The GPS data map. And finally, a satellite image of the lake, with a red circle drawn a quarter-mile offshore from the overlook. The lake gives, and the lake takes. Marcus, Rossi said, her voice quiet, almost conversational, but sometimes, with a little help, we can convince it to give something back. She told him about the stolen fishing boat, about the anonymous tip they'd received, a lie, but a plausible one, from a fisherman who had seen him out on the water that night. She told him that a dive team was preparing to do a grid search of the area Agnes Peterson had indicated. An area with a deep underwater trench. They're going to find him, Marcus, with weights on his feet and a bag over his head. And the trace evidence on his body will lead right back to you and that boat. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He stared at the photos, his jaw working silently. The carefully constructed world of Marcus Thorne was collapsing in on him. Then, he looked up at Rossi, and in his eyes, she saw not remorse, but the cold, calculating mind of a man trying to find the best way out. He was going to cut a deal. The climax of the search for Liam Hannon did not happen with a frantic chase or a volley of gunfire. It happened in the cold, grey light of dawn. 3 days later, guided by Marcus Thorne's confession, a Coast Guard cutter and a boat from the Sheriff's Department floated above a spot on the lake known as the Devil's Moor. A deep, cold canyon in the lake bed. The water was calm, its surface like a sheet of dark, polished steel. The divers went down. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Rossi stood on the deck of the cutter, the wind biting at her face, her eyes fixed on the spot where the bubbles from the divers' tanks broke the surface. Clara was in custody, having confessed her role in the conspiracy. Marcus's 2 hired thugs had been picked up in a pre-dawn raid. It was over. All that was left was to bring Liam home. A yellow marker buoy suddenly shot to the surface. It was the signal. They had found him. The truth, as it was finally pieced together from Marcus's chillingly detached confession, was even more brutal than Rossi had imagined. Liam had arrived at the overlook, expecting to find a distraught Clara. Instead, he found Marcus and his men. There was a confrontation. Liam, realizing he had been betrayed on all fronts, fought back, but it was 3 against 1. They beat him, subdued him, and dragged him, unconscious, down the bluff, careful not to leave a trace. They loaded him onto the stolen fishing boat they had waiting, out on the dark water, under the light of the harvest moon. They tied weights to his ankles. Liam had regained consciousness just before they pushed him over the side. His last moments were spent looking into the eyes of the man who had been his business partner, his friend, and the woman he had loved. He had died not knowing which betrayal had been the one that sealed his fate. Afterward, Marcus had meticulously orchestrated the scene. He drove Liam's car back to the overlook. He wiped it down, placed the wallet and phone on the seat, and locked it. Then, using a spare pair of Liam's shoes he had taken from the house, he created the footprints, walking them to the rail to create the perfect illusion of a man who had simply vanished into thin air. It was a cold, calculated act of deception, the final, arrogant flourish of a man who believed he could outsmart the world. The ending was closed. The truth was uncovered. The killers were brought to justice. Marcus Thorne, in exchange for his testimony and leading them to the body, would be spared the death penalty, but he would spend the rest of his life in prison. Clara Hannon, for her role in the conspiracy, received a 20-year sentence. The mystery of the vanishing at Lake Michigan was solved, but for the town of Havenwood, and for Detective Rossi, the story never truly ended. It left a chilling aftertaste, a stain that the wind and the waves could not wash away. The case had exposed the dark secrets that can fester beneath the surface of a perfect life. The quiet desperation that can live in a beautiful home. The capacity for betrayal that can hide behind a familiar smile. Sometimes, late at night, when she couldn't sleep, Rossi would find herself driving out to the overlook on Ridge Road. She would stand at the wooden rail, at the very spot where the footprints had ended, and look out at the vast, indifferent darkness of the lake. She had found the truth. She had closed the case. But she had not brought peace. She had only brought an ending. The fragility of life seemed palpable in that place. A man's entire world, his love, his work, his principles, his future, had been dismantled and destroyed, and his body committed to the cold, silent depths. The lake had been forced to give up its secret this time. But Rossi knew it held countless others. It was a repository of forgotten stories, of lost souls, of mysteries that would never be solved. The saying in Havenwood had been wrong. The lake doesn't always give, and it doesn't always take. Sometimes, it is simply made to be an accomplice. It becomes a keeper of secrets, a silent witness to the darkness that men carry within them. And as the waves hiss upon the shore, they seem to whisper a haunting, eternal question to all who will listen. How well do you truly know the people you love? How well do you truly know the quiet, dark places that lie just beyond the edge of the light?